The smell of fresh-cut grass outside the window has always reminded me of my son. When he was 7, he used to drag a lawn chair out to the backyard every Saturday morning and watch his father mow in slow, even lines. He said it looked like the outfield at Wrigley Field. That was a long time ago. Now I sit in this same chair, alone, and the smell just reminds me of what I lost without even realizing I was losing it. I turned 68 last March. I live in the same house I have lived in for 31 years, a pale yellow Craftsman on a quiet street in Knoxville, Tennessee. My husband Earl passed 9 years ago, a heart attack on a Tuesday morning, quiet as everything else about him. We had paid off this house together. We had painted every room twice, replaced the porch boards, planted the dogwood tree in the front yard that still blooms pink every April, like clockwork. This house was ours. After he was gone, it became mine. My son's name is Darnell. He is 41 years old and works in commercial real estate outside of Atlanta. He married a woman named Savannah 6 years ago. She is polished in the way that certain people practice at being polished. Hair always smooth. Sentences always finished. The kind of woman who brings a hostess gift to a casual dinner and makes sure you notice it. I tried. I want to say that plainly. I tried with her from the beginning. I drove down to Atlanta for the engagement party. I sat beside her mother at the rehearsal dinner. I held my tongue when she told me, 3 weeks before the wedding, that she preferred I not wear yellow because it would clash with the bridesmaids. I wore ivory and said nothing. I told myself that was love, that biting your tongue for someone you love is just part of the cost. The first few years were manageable. Darnell called every Sunday. He came home for Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving. Savannah came with him and smiled her practiced smile and complimented the house and the way people compliment something they find quaint. I heard it in her voice. The particular brightness people use when they mean the opposite of what they say. Then things shifted. I'm not sure exactly when. Maybe it was gradual. The Sunday calls became every other week, then once a month. He stopped coming home for Thanksgiving. One year he told me they were going to Savannah's parents in Charleston. Fine. The next year, the same. Fine. I started filling the holiday with other things. I had my neighbor Ruth Ann over, made her recipe for sweet potato pie that she taught me back in 1998. I kept myself busy. I told myself I was being gracious. What I did not tell myself, because I was not ready to hear it, was that I was being erased slowly. My husband Earl had been a careful man. When he died, he had a small life insurance policy, a modest savings account, and this house, which by then was worth considerably more than what we had paid for it. The neighborhood had changed in the best way. Young families moved in. A coffee shop opened 2 blocks over. Property values climbed. By the time I turned 65, the house had been appraised at $412,000. I had no mortgage. I had a small retirement account from the years I worked in hospital administration. I was not wealthy, but I was stable in the way that people who have lived carefully for a long time can be stable. Darnell knew this. I had told him once, several years ago, that when I was gone, the house would go to him. That was the plan Earl and I had always had. The one child, the one house. It was simple. I think Savannah found out around that same time. 14 months ago, Darnell called to tell me he had been promoted to a senior partner role at his firm. I was genuinely proud. I told him so. He sounded happy. We talked for almost an hour, which had not happened in a while. I let myself believe things were turning around. Then he asked if I had ever thought about downsizing. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the house is a lot to maintain on your own." He said the yard alone. He said the property taxes have been going up every year. He said Atlanta had great senior communities, some of them really nice, walking distance to everything. They do activities. I was quiet for a moment. I asked him if he was suggesting I sell the house. He said he was just thinking about what would be best for me. I said I would think about it. I did not think about it. I knew what I had heard in his voice. It was not concern. It was the beginning of something. 3 weeks later, he called again. This time he mentioned a colleague of his, a financial advisor he trusted, someone who specialized in estate planning for older homeowners. He said this man had helped a lot of families avoid probate complications. He said it might be worth a conversation. I said I had my own attorney. I had used the same man, a quiet, thorough lawyer named Mr. Abernathy, for 20 years. He had handled Earl's estate. He knew my situation. Darnell said, of course, just wanted to put it on my radar. I hung up and sat with the feeling for a while. It was an uncomfortable feeling, the kind that settles in your chest and does not leave when you try to distract yourself with the television or a cup of tea. My granddaughter's graduation was in May. She is my daughter-in-law's niece, and I use the word granddaughter loosely, because that is how Savannah introduced her to me when the girl was 12, saying, "This is Darnell's mother. She is basically your grandmother now." I had taken that seriously. I had gone to her school plays. I had sent cards on her birthday every year without fail. I had driven down to Atlanta twice to take her shopping before homecoming. I loved that child the way you love someone who has wandered into your life and decided to stay. The graduation was at a large church hall outside Atlanta. Savannah had organized the luncheon afterward at a restaurant downtown. She had sent out a detailed itinerary by email. I had been included on the list. I had responded yes. I had driven 4 hours from Knoxville the morning of. I arrived early and found a seat at the family table near the front. I had brought a card with a check inside. $250, which was what I could comfortably give. I had also brought a small jewelry box with a pair of pearl earrings that had been my mother's. I had thought about it for weeks before deciding. I wanted her to have something real. The ceremony was beautiful. She walked across that stage in her white gown, and I cried a little, quietly, the way you do at those things when you have watched a child grow up. At the luncheon, I found my seat at the family table and waited for things to begin. Savannah's mother came and sat on the other side of me. She was warm to me, briefly, and then turned fully away and began a long conversation with someone I did not know. I ordered water. I looked at the menu. I waited. My granddaughter came to the table eventually, flushed and excited, and I stood up to hug her. She hugged me back and said, "Thank you for coming." And then Savannah appeared at her elbow and said, "We need a photo." And just like that, my granddaughter was swept away to the other side of the room. I sat back down. At some point during the appetizers, Savannah came to me. She bent down near my ear, which is a thing I have noticed people do when they want to say something in public that they do not want anyone else to hear. She told me in a low and even voice that she had rearranged the seating and there was actually a table near the back set up for family friends, and she thought I might be more comfortable there. She was smiling while she said it. Her teeth were very white. I looked at her for a moment. I looked at the table near the front where Darnell was sitting, laughing at something his brother-in-law had said. He had not looked my way since I arrived. I had driven 4 hours. I said, "All right." I picked up my purse. I left the card with the check and the earring box at my original seat, and I walked to the back table. There were 2 other women there, both of whom seemed confused about why they were there as well. We made polite conversation. I ate my meal. I kept my face very still. On the drive home, I did not cry. I have found that certain hurts go too deep for immediate tears. They settle somewhere below the surface and wait. Darnell did not call that evening. He did not call the next day. On the 3rd day, I called him. He answered and said, "Hey, Mom, how are you?" in the same easy voice he always uses, like nothing had happened. I asked if he had noticed I was moved to a different table. He said there had been a lot of people. It was a little chaotic. He was sorry if I felt lost in the shuffle. Lost in the shuffle. I said, okay. I said I loved him. He said he loved me too. We hung up. That night, I sat in the kitchen for a long time after dinner. I looked at the walls Earl and I had painted together, a warm cream color we had picked out from a hardware store swatch book on a Saturday afternoon. I looked at the window above the sink, where I had stood 10,000 times watching that dogwood tree change with the seasons. I thought about what my husband would have said. Earl was not a complicated man, but he was a clear-eyed one. He would have said, "Vera, pay attention to what people show you." I thought about the financial advisor Darnell had mentioned. I thought about the timing of that conversation, right around when property values in my neighborhood had been in the local paper. I thought about Savannah's practiced smile and the way she had said Darnell's mother. She is basically your grandmother now, as if the relationship was something she had assigned rather than something that had grown. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Abernathy's office. It was after hours. I left a message asking if I could come in the following week. I slept better than I expected to. Mr. Abernathy is a small man with reading glasses and a very organized desk. I have always liked him because he does not waste words. He listened to everything I told him without writing anything down, just listening, and when I was finished, he asked 2 questions. He asked whether I had signed anything, and I said no. He asked whether Darnell was on any of my existing accounts or documents, and I said no, not since we had updated everything after Earl passed. He said, "Good. Let's keep it that way, and let's do a few things proactively." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything: my will, the house deed, my retirement account beneficiary designations. He explained a revocable living trust in language I could actually follow. He explained that the house could be placed in trust with specific terms about what happened to it after I was gone, and that this would not change my ability to live in it or make decisions about it in any way while I was alive. It would simply mean that the distribution of the property would follow my exact wishes and could not be contested easily. He also said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "The fact that you have not signed anything is important. Don't let urgency be created for you." I did not know exactly what he meant in that moment, but I knew enough to write it down. I went home and I did not call Darnell. I waited. 6 days later, he called me. He said he wanted to revisit the conversation about the house. He said Savannah had been doing some research and there was a situation called unintentional estate complications that could be a real problem for families who had not set things up properly. He said his colleague, the financial advisor, had an opening next Thursday. He said it would just be a conversation, no pressure, just information. I asked, "Is this advisor in Atlanta?" He said yes. I said, "And you would come with me?" He said, "Of course." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Let me check my calendar and I'll call you back." I did not call him back that week. I was back in Mr. Abernathy's office instead, signing documents. The house went into a revocable living trust. The trust had specific language about distribution. I also updated my will with more detailed language than before, and I wrote out on a plain piece of paper that Mr. Abernathy witnessed my reasons for the decisions I was making. He told me it was not legally required. I told him I wanted it anyway. He nodded and filed it with everything else. On a Sunday afternoon, about 2 weeks after that, Darnell called again. He asked if I had looked at my calendar. I said I had. He asked if Thursday still worked. I said I had actually already been to see Mr. Abernathy. There was a pause. He said, "Oh, for what?" I said, "Just some updates, making sure everything was in order." Another pause, longer this time. He asked if I had changed my will. I said that my arrangements were between me and my attorney, and that had always been the case. His voice shifted. It did not get loud exactly, but it changed texture in the way voices do when the person has been waiting to say something and can no longer wait. He said he was only trying to help me. He said he was only trying to help me. He said I was getting older and he worried. He said the house was a lot to manage alone. He said he and Savannah had been talking and they thought it made more sense for the equity to be accessible rather than tied up. He said some families in their situation had found it more practical to sell and use the proceeds. I let him finish. Then I said, Darnell, I was moved to the back table at your stepdaughter's graduation. You have not asked me about that once. Silence. I said, the house is mine. Your father and I built this life together. I will decide what happens to it. He said, Mom. I said, I love you. I mean that every time I say it, but I am not going to sign anything. I said goodbye, and I put the phone down on the kitchen table. Not angrily, carefully, the way you set something down that you want to keep intact. I sat there for a while. The afternoon light was coming through the window the way it does in early summer in Tennessee, golden and unhurried. The dogwood tree in the front yard was full and green. I could hear a lawnmower somewhere down the block. I thought about Earl. I thought about all the Saturday mornings and all the painted walls and all the small, ordinary choices that add up to a life. I thought about the way my son had looked at that graduation, laughing easily at the front table, not once turning to find me. I did not call Darnell back that week or the next. Eventually, he sent a text that said he hoped I was doing okay and that he loved me. I wrote back, I love you too, because it is true. That has not changed. But something else is also true. I have lived long enough to know the difference between someone who worries about you and someone who is worried about what you have. Those are not the same thing. I learned that later than I should have. I am not ashamed of that. People learn things when they are ready. The trust is filed. The documents are signed. Mr. Abernathy has everything he needs. My neighbor Ruth Ann knows where the lockbox key is. My church has been named in the will for a portion I feel good about. There is a small fund I have set aside for my granddaughter, separate from everything else, because she did not choose her family's behavior, and she has always been kind to me without anyone telling her to be. I still live in this pale yellow house on a quiet street in Knoxville. I still sit in the same chair in the backyard sometimes. The dogwood tree still blooms pink every April. The mortgage has been paid for years. The deed is in a trust with my name on it. Nobody is going to move me to the back table of my own life again. That much I know for certain. I have been thinking lately about the word gracious. How many times I used it to describe myself when what I really meant was silent. I told myself I was being gracious when I wore ivory instead of yellow. I told myself I was being gracious when I sat at the back table and ate my meal and kept my face still. But graciousness is a choice you make from a place of strength. What I was doing for a long time was something else. I was shrinking a little at a time because it felt like the loving thing to do. The truth I had to sit with, and it took me longer than I am proud of, is that love does not require you to disappear. What happened with Darnell did not come out of nowhere. I can see that now. Every time I swallowed something that should have been said, every time I adjusted myself to keep the peace, I was teaching people around me what I would accept. That is not anyone's fault but my own. People will take the space you give them, not because they are all bad, but because that is simply how it works. When I finally stopped giving that space, something changed. Not dramatically. Not with a confrontation or raised voices. I just stopped moving. I think about Earl a lot when I think about this. He was not a man who talked much about principles, but he lived by them in a plain and steady way. He would not have asked permission to protect what he built. He would not have waited to see whether people appreciated it before deciding it was worth keeping. He just knew what was his and he held on to it without making a performance of it. I spent years after he was gone trying to earn back the belonging I already had. That was the mistake. You do not earn belonging in your own life. You claim it. Going to Mr. Abernathy that first time was not just a legal decision. It was the first time in a long while that I acted on my own judgment without waiting for someone else to confirm it. I knew what I had seen. I knew what the timing meant. And instead of talking myself out of it, or giving Darnell the benefit of a doubt I no longer had, I acted. There is something clarifying about that, about deciding that your own read on a situation is worth trusting. The documents are signed now, the house is protected, but what I carry forward is not just the legal structure. It is the understanding that good values without clear thinking are not enough, and clear thinking without the will to act on it is not enough either. All three have to be present at the same time. The character to know right from wrong, the mind to see what is actually happening in front of you, not what you wish were happening, and the steadiness to do what needs to be done even when it costs you something. It cost me something. I am not going to pretend it did not. Darnell is still my son, and I love him without condition, but I no longer confuse love with compliance. That dogwood tree in the front yard still blooms every April. This pale yellow house is still mine, and I am still here, sitting in Earl's old lawn chair, paying attention. That is enough. That is everything.